Hi, and welcome to Distilling in Australia. My name is Nick, and today we're going to go through the process, quantities and equipment needed to ferment out your sugar wash in 5 days. So this is going to be quite a comprehensive video. I'm going to go through all the equipment that you need, ratios, all the products that you need to be able to do that. And if you hang around to the end, I'll also show you a methodology where you can actually ferment your wash out in 60 to 80 hours. Okay, so a bit quicker if you are in a hurry. Now, before we get started, I have to stress that this is a licensed distillery. I am licensed to produce alcohol and to distill alcohol. You must keep in mind that you are not allowed to distill 1 single milliliter of alcohol in Australia unless you are licensed. Okay, so if you've got a 5 litre still and you think it's legal, it is not. Okay, there is 0 amount of alcohol you are allowed to distill in this country unless you're licensed. Okay, so if you're interested in becoming licensed, I have a whole series of videos that cover it, my process, how I went through it, and you can go back through all those and it'll show you the process. So, but today, the sugar wash. Now, a lot of Puritarians will frown upon the humble old sugar wash, but my thing is rum, and rum is made from fermentation of molasses, which effectively is a form of sugar wash. So that's why I do the sugar wash. I'm not interested in doing the whiskies and the bourbons and the grains. My preferred method is to do it in this manner. Now, a lot of what I'm going to go through here is as per manufacturer's recommendations. I'll give you a few tips about what I do, or not tips, I'll tell you what I do. Now remember, there is more than one way to skin a cat, all right? So I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but what I am saying is that this is the way that I do it and it works for me, all right? So if you have another way to do it, knock yourself out, okay? I'm not making myself out to be any guru here. You can do it your own way. So before we get started, as always, here is 5 seconds of your life you'll never get back. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing you're going to need is a container. Now, obviously the size of the container, so that's my fermenter there, it's a 130 litre fermenter. The size of the container will determine the ratio. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you quantities per litre of water. Now when we say, I'm going to be referring to your final volume. So the final volume is your water content plus your additives giving you a final volume. Okay, so you'll see the difference between the two. So what the first thing is, you need a food grade container of some description, preferably. That's where I would go. So you can pick these up at Bunnings. Yeah, they're not overly expensive. Now don't worry about brand names here. Okay, I'm not here to push anyone's brand. I've just got all this stuff out here, so as I go through the process and make sure that I cover everything. All right, so first of all, your container, a food grade sanitizer. Okay, so what you do is wash out your container and your equipment, your stirrers, or whatever it is you're going to be using, with a food grade sanitizer. Now obviously this is a lot of food grade sanitizer, but you know, I'm commercial, so you know, I use a fair bit of it. Okay, the next thing obviously is your water. Okay, now as you'll see down here, I use a filter. Okay, so I have a large water filter here, and that's what I use to filter our water when I put it into my fermenter. Now the other thing is that when you're adding your water to your container, you need to aerate your water. Now, you don't have to go nuts about it, but I just use a brass spray nozzle at the end of the hose, and that provides enough oxygen in the water to give the yeast the initial amount of oxygen they require in the water for them to get started. So that's your water content. So we've got containers, sanitization, your water. Next thing, which is very important, is some sort of pH reader. Again, I'm not flocking a brand, but a digital pH reader is important. Now, with a pH reader, two things you will need is some distilled water and some buffer. Now, the buffer you can get from any hydroponic shop, or you can buy it online. You get a 4.0 buffer and you get a 7.0 buffer as well. And what you can do then is you can then calibrate your pH meter to ensure that it matches the pH buffer. I found that's the most effective way. Although these do come with little satchels of pH, it's a bit hit and miss when testing it. I prefer to buy something that is, is going to be the proper amount, and then you can test it. I just have a little glass in here that I keep clean, keep it in there to test it. So if you're looking at, for argument's sake, this is straight water out of the tap, and I am living on the Gold Coast, and you will find that the pH of this water is around about 6.5, so 6.9 at this stage, 7, so it's a bit higher. So it varies between about 6.6 and 7 for this Gold Coast water pH level. So it's important to know the pH level of your water. Also, when you store your pH meter, best to keep the cap on to keep it moist. Okay, so it lasts a lot longer and means you don't have to calibrate it as often, but ensure that your pH meter is calibrated. Okay, so let's get into some figures. All right, now the first thing is obviously your water to sugar. Now, if you're after 20 litres of final product, you will need about 17 litres of water. Okay, so don't put 20 litres of water in it and then add your sugar on top of that, because that'll increase the volume over and above that. It won't hurt the initial, it won't hurt what you're doing. In actual fact, it would probably be a little beneficial, but the trouble is you're going to obviously have too much product in your actual container. So you need to allow at least a 20% headroom on your container. All right, so if you want 20 litres, have a 25 litre container for argument's sake. So you just need a bit of headroom, because when you add the yeast, it's going to froth up and you end up with a mess everywhere if you don't do that. Okay, so sugar. So the ratio I use is between 200 and 250 grams of sugar. All right, doesn't have to be caster sugar, any white sugar will do, per litre. All right. Now, I personally use 232 grams per litre. Okay, that's what I use. All right. So I put in 112 litres of water into the fermenter, and I add 26 kilograms of sugar to it, which gives me a final volume of 130 litres. All right. So that's what I use. So once you've added your 200 250 grams, that will give you a specific gravity of around about 1.07 to 1.08, depending on how much you put in. So I like to keep it at that range. So you're talking around about 9 to 10% potential alcohol at that particular point. Now, testing it. All right, so this is my hydrometer. And what I've done is I've put 80 mils of distilled water into my beaker here, and you put your hydrometer in there and you give it a twirl, and it should come in at around about 1, which it does. Okay, so by doing it that way, you know that your hydrometer is calibrated. All right, so that's important to know, because if it's floating up here or down there, you know that your hydrometer is not correctly calibrated. So yeah, it's good to know how you do that. So that's the easiest way to do it, is just to put in some distilled water, and you'll see that it floats at 1. If it floats at 1, you're right. Okay, so you add your sugar to your water. Now your water should be around about 30 degrees Celsius. All right, so anywhere from 28 to 32 degrees Celsius is a really good range for your wash to remain at. All right, so that's the ideal temperature. You can pitch it a bit higher, pitch the yeast at a bit higher temperature if you want to, but again, that's personal preference. It's not, from my experience, not critical, but I find that 28 to 32 degrees Celsius is the perfect fermentation level. So, all right, we've added our sugar, we've added our water, we've got our ratio there. Now, the next thing is nutrients. Now, the nutrient I use is a commercial use nutrient. Again, I'm not promoting the brand. You do your own research about the nutrients you use, but for the nutrient, I use about 0.6 to 0.8 grams of nutrient per litre of final volume. Okay, so that just gives you a bit of an idea of how much nutrient I put in there. And then the next product that I put in there is DAP, or as it's known technically, Diammonium phosphate, or DAP. Now, this is a food grade diammonium phosphate, and it is basically fertilizer. All right. Now, for this, I add 0.6 to 0.8 grams per litre of water. So 0.6 to 0.8 grams of DAP per litre of final volume. Okay, that's important. This is an important step to have that available. You can buy it. It is a little difficult to buy, so just be prepared to have to search around a little bit to buy it, but it is available and you can buy it and have it delivered. So we've now got our sugar, we've got our water, we've got our temperature, we have a pH, probably it's going to be around about 6.6 depending on your town water. Okay, now if it is less than 5.2, then what you do is you add bicarb soda to it, and that will raise the pH level from below 5.2 to about 5.2, which is a starting point for your fermentation before you pitch the yeast. All right. Now, if it is above that, which it is for me, and my pH is higher than that, which is about 6.6 to 7, as you've seen on my pH level, what I do is that I add citric acid. Now, this is pharmaceutical grade citric acid. Don't have to have this. Lemon juice will do the same job. So I use around about, well, in this, a couple of tablespoons. So you don't need much. It's really just a few grams. So just add a few grams at a time to your wash. Give it a stir. Read it with your pH meter until you get it down to around about that 5.2. So it doesn't matter if it's 5.15 or 5.25, sort of around that sort of range. All right. So that's what I use is a pharmaceutical grade citric acid. So that's, you have to sort of judge that and add that as you need it to bring that down. So you've now got everything set. Okay, your sugar wash is in there, your sugar's in there, it's all dissolved, you've stirred it up, you've got your nutrients in there, you've balanced the pH to 5.2 or thereabouts, you've got your DAP in there as well, so everything is set, and your water temperatures are between that 28 and 32 degrees Celsius. Now, you're set. Okay, now with your bucket, as long as you're not introducing oxygen into your wash during the fermentation process, it doesn't really need to be tightly sealed or airtight, or you don't need a bubbler. Really, all you need to do is drill a 5mm hole in the top of your lid and click your lid down, and because you're producing CO2, the CO2 will come out of that small hole. Now, this is not, it can be a closed fermenter, but it's actually not, because what happens is fermentation sits in here, the CO2 comes out through here and straight out through this open pipe. Now, I can in actual fact seal it by just turning the handle, and then that becomes a sealed system because it is airtight doing that, but I don't do that. I always leave that open because I don't want the CO2 pressure to build up in the wash. All right, so it's not necessary to have the bubbler. You can if you want. Obviously, if you're moving it around, be very careful. You don't want to slosh it around so the lid can come off or spill out or whatever, and you end up with a sticky mess everywhere. All right. So what I then suggest you do is not test, but when you go to add your yeast, what I recommend is you do it around about 5:30, 6 o'clock at night. Okay, now there's a very good reason for that, and I'll get to that. So in terms of the yeast, what we're going to do is add the yeast to the wash, and I'm using about 0.8 to 1 gram of yeast. So this is my yeast that I use per litre of water. Okay, so it's 0.8 to 1 gram. Now I know that is high for a lot of people. A lot of people who do beer will do about half of that, but we're looking at fermenting this out in a 5-day period. So once you've added your yeast, pop the lid on, let it go. Okay, so you've done that at 6 o'clock at night, 5:30, 6 o'clock at night. So so then you go to bed, forget about it. All right, now it'll do its thing, it'll foam up and bubble up and all the rest of it, and the yeast will rehydrate. Now, you can, if you want to, hydrate your yeast before you pitch it. So you just add the yeast to some warm water around about 36 degrees, let it rehydrate for about 20 minutes, and then you can pitch it in. So yeah, just make sure that you well hydrate your yeast that you're going to add to the bucket, and you make allowances for the extra volume of water that you put in there. So you can rehydrate your yeast before you put it in here by just simply putting it in clean water around about 36 degrees, 32 to 36 degrees Celsius. Pop that in there. So anyway, you wake up the next morning and you come out to your shed, garage, whatever it is, your distillery, and the first thing you do is that you take a sample. Now I'm lucky, I have a tap here on my fermenter, and I can just take it straight out of the fermenter into the beacon, put in your 80 mils, and you test your SG. Okay, now your SG level, as I said, should be, when you do pitch it, about 1.08, 1.07, somewhere around about there, which will give you around about that 10%. So when you do pitch it, the next morning you'll probably notice that it hasn't gone down a lot. It might be at 0.06, 0.07, somewhere around that sort of mark the next morning. But more importantly, after you've tested your specific gravity, then pop it in to your glass and test it, and you will find that in that 12-hour period, your pH would have dropped from about 5.2 down to about 3.7. Okay, now it could be 3.6, could be 3.4, could be 3.9. All right, it's going to be in that sort of range. All right, now if it has dropped that low, which is in that first 12-hour period, simply get your bicarbonate soda. Okay, or you don't have to use bicarb soda. If you have another product that you want to use, or you would do your own research because you don't like the idea of using bicarb soda, that's perfectly fine. I'm not advocating you need to use it, but you need to have some sort of pH balancer, and then you add the bicarb soda to your wash. Now again, as a rule of thumb, it works out to be about 1 gram to 2 grams of bicarb soda per litre. So 1 to 2 grams roughly, but just add it a little bit at a time and then just test it. Okay, now when you add the bicarb soda, if that's what you choose to use, it will froth up. Okay, so that's the releasing of the CO2 out of the bicarb soda, and it does froth up. Just add it gradually, don't add it in one hit, because it will froth up quite vigorously when you do that. So what you're aiming to do is bring that pH level back up to around about 4.4. So this sort of seems to be a sweet spot for the pH. So that's what you do. So every day, every morning, get up, test your SG. You'll notice that it will decrease, 1.05, 1.04 every day, a couple of gravity points every day, or 1.5 gravity points every day. Keep your wash at around about that 28 to 32 degrees Celsius level, and just ensure that your pH remains at around about that 4.4. Now it doesn't matter if it's 4.2 or 4.6, but around about that 4.4. And then that's all you really need to do. So at the end of your 5 days, when you go to test it on your 5th day, you'll find that it will have fermented out completely, and your hydrometer will be reading at somewhere around about 0.95 to sort of 0.9 sort of to 1, somewhere in that range, but it'll certainly be under the 1, and you're done. All right, so that's your wash done, and it does it in 5 days. So as long as you follow that basic process, and again, you can substitute what you like in the process, that's up to you, that will be how it works. Now, if you've stayed with me this long, if you want to do it a bit quicker, this is how you do it. You still use the same quantities. However, when you add your sugars, in the first instance, you only add 30% of your total sugar that you're going to add to the wash. Then you leave it. You add your yeast, do everything else, all right, and then you leave it for 12 to 15 hours, or 10 to 15 hours, and then you come back and then you add 40% of your yeast to the wash, leave it for another 10 to 15 hours, come back and add the final 30% of the wash of the sugar, to your wash. Now, it's obviously important that when you're adding the sugars, you're not stirring it and adding oxygen to your wash. So do it carefully, obviously. But if you do it in those 3 stages, 30%, 40%, 30%, then it will ferment out, I should say, in between 60 to 80 hours. And the reason for that is that, like all living organisms, yeast needs water. So the more water it has, the healthier and more reproductive the yeasts are, and so therefore they go through the food a lot quicker, which is of course the sugar, and it ferments out a lot faster. I don't do that simply because I have a conical fermenter, and if I add the sugar to it in those stages, all that happens is that the sugar just settles at the very bottom of the fermenter, and it doesn't work. So I actually mix all my sugars in to start off with, and I find that works perfectly okay. So that's it. That's the process. I've gone through everything here. Obviously, basic temperature meters, those sorts of things, they're the things that help you a lot. So that's all I want to go through today. That's the process that I use. They're the quantities that I use, and I get that result. I always get very clean smelling wash, and around about that 10% alcohol by volume potential in my wash. So that's all for me for today. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, refer it on to friends. It helps the channel. And I'll see you next time. Ciao for now. Distilling alcohol is illegal in Australia unless you hold the appropriate licenses and permits. I am not a lawyer, and the contents of this video are not intended to be legal advice. Do not rely on any information contained in this video, and seek your own legal professional advice before making any decisions. Be aware, the Australian Tax Office and the local law enforcement agencies will be taking interest in this channel due to its content. Please keep this in mind before posting any comments. Any comments posted are the opinion of the person posting and not of this channel. Let's get started.